Hello Year 10. This is the last lesson in the B1.4 Circulatory System booklet. You will need your booklet in front of you. Today's lesson is going to be a recap, revision and past paper question lesson. So if you turn to page, first of all, 25 in your book, page 25 and 26, in front of you, you should be able to see a cross-section through the heart, and you should be able to see the names of the blood vessels labelled on this, the names of the chambers, and they haven't given you the specific names of the valves, but I'll go over those now as we go through this. So I'm going to start with a red pen, so I'll just see if I can get red. And red is going to denote oxygenated blood, so blood with lots of oxygen, okay, so it's representing oxygenated blood. And I'm going to start at the pulmonary vein here. So this blood, this oxygenated blood, has come in to the heart via the pulmonary vein, okay, and it's come from the lungs. How do we know it's come from the lungs? Well, first of all, the word pulmonary is always to do with the lungs. And secondly, if it's oxygenated, it must have come from the lungs because it's picked up oxygen. So, into the heart on the left side. Remember, this is the left, this is the right side of the heart. It comes into this top chamber here. This is our left atrium, the top chamber. And then it needs to go through this valve. And this is, if you want to know what the name of this valve is, this is the bicuspid valve. Now, as the top atria squeeze, so you can imagine the atria, the top part squeezing, this valve opens, the blood rushes through into the lower chamber. The lower chamber is the left ventricle. At the same time, okay, that this atrium wall has squeezed and this valve has opened, this valve here closes. So this valve, okay, here is our semilunar valve, okay. So this valve closes, blood fills the ventricle, the bicuspid valve closes behind, now the ventricle contracts and squeezes. At this point, the semilunar valve opens and the blood leaves the left side of the heart through the aorta. And it's going to go off to the head and the body and the torso, carrying oxygenated blood to where it's required. Okay, so this is our left side of the heart. Now, I'm now going to swap to blue because this oxygenated blood that's gone off to the head and the body is delivering the oxygen and the glucose to the cells for respiration. So now this blood that's going to return to the heart in the second pump, okay, because it's a double circulatory system, is going to be deoxygenated. And it comes into the right side of the heart, so the right side is deoxygenated, and it comes from the lower part of the body, from the inferior vena cava, and from the top half of the body, from the torso and from the head in the superior vena cava, into the right side of the heart. And I've drawn the arrows in blue to show deoxygenated blood now. It comes into the right atrium, and as this right atrium squeezes, so you can imagine pressure being put on this top chamber here, this valve here opens. This is the tricuspid valve. Tricuspid valve opens, blood floods into the lower chamber, the right ventricle. Tricuspid valve behind it closes, semilunar valve opens, and blood flows through as the ventricle squeezes. It pushes blood out of the heart by the pulmonary artery. So an artery always goes away from the heart, and the pulmonary artery is going to go to the lungs. And this is why it splits off to the left and the right. So this side is going to the right lung, this side is going to the left lung. And the pulmonary artery contains deoxygenated blood, Why is it going to the lungs? To go and pick up oxygen. How do we know that this artery is always called the pulmonary? Because it's got pulmonary in front of it because it's going to the lungs. So that's a quick overview of labelling the heart. Now, I'm going to move it to the next page, okay? So just a couple of questions as a starter activity. Can you see if you could answer these questions? Now, they're not in your book, but I suggest you write the answer on the back cover. So this is like a little starter task. Just write questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Well, number 7 actually is the diagram one. So we'll do that later. Okay. But certainly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we'll go over them. Pause the video. So, question 1. The largest main artery of the circulatory system is the aorta. The blood vessels that carry blood from the upper and the lower parts of the body, vena cava. What separates the left and right sides of the heart? You should remember from previous lessons, the septum. The blood vessels that carry blood to the lungs are going to be pulmonary artery. And away from the lungs is pulmonary vein. The 4 chambers of the heart, I'm not going to write them fully. Left atrium, left ventricle, right atrium, right ventricle. What keeps blood from, and that should say flowing, sorry, not glowing, flowing back on itself, back into the chamber of the heart, are the valves. So question 7 says, on the diagram of the heart that you've got on page 25, draw arrows showing the flow of blood through the heart. And if I were you, I would use blue to show deoxygenated and change to red to show oxygenated. So you've got a clear idea of the route and the pattern the blood flows, okay? So, page 25 then, okay? You've got a diagram on the left-hand side. Hopefully you've added your labels to that diagram and you've answered those questions, okay, which were the questions that sorry, apologies, I asked you to put them on the back of your book. Actually, you should be on page 25. On the right-hand side of the same diagram, because it's been reduced down in size, you can see this diagram. So for this one, pause the video, see if you can identify these labels A through to J, okay? It does look quite complicated, so my advice is to follow it with your finger or use a coloured pen or pencil, okay, to try and put those arrows in to show the direction it flows. Pause the video. So, looking at these labels, I'll go through them alphabetically. We've got A is pointing to the aorta. B is our left atrium. C is the septum. D is the right ventricle. E is the cardiac wall, or just wall of the heart muscle. F is our valve, and if you can identify which valve, if you've got bicuspid, absolutely superb, means you've understood. G is our left ventricle. H is our right atrium. I is our pulmonary artery. And J is the vena cava. And if you've got that it's the inferior vena cava, then that's even better. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Can you give yourself a score out of 10 if you manage to label that up without having to look back at previous diagrams, okay? So underneath that diagram, you've got some questions here. So we've already done that bit. We've identified the parts. Complete each sentence with a word or words that will make the sentence a true statement. So veins carry blood, something the heart. Arteries carry blood, something from the heart. So veins carry blood to, and that should be a lowercase, it automatically does it after a full stop. And arteries carry blood away. Easy way to remember this, arteries begin with A, away begins with A. Tiny blood vessels that connect up the arteries and veins are called the capillaries. So if you're studying triple, we will be looking at the different blood vessels in detail and comparing them in the next week. The fluid part of the circulatory system is called the blood flow. Fluid part is called the blood flow. I'm not sure about that question. I will come back to that, Year 10. I think this is a mistake here. And in your own words, because we've missed out question 3 as well. Question 3 was the main organ is the heart. The fluid part of the circulatory system is the blood. Okay, is the blood. So blood is part of your circulatory system. Apologies, brain's not working this afternoon. Okay, so question 3 should actually say the main organ of the circulatory system is the heart, and 4, the fluid part of the circulatory system is called the blood. Then question 5, this should be, in your own words, tell how blood flows through the heart and to other parts of the body. So it doesn't matter where you start from, okay, as long as you can get back to the same place, okay, and write that down. So hopefully you did that when you did your QWC response for the route of the blood through the heart. So from page 18, the complete journey as it passes through the heart, starting in the pulmonary artery. So check your draft response on page 18. But also make sure that you have submitted that as well, okay, on Moodle for me to describe the route it takes. So last part of this lesson, we always give you some practice GCSE questions so you can see the kinds of things WJEC are likely to ask you in examinations. So we make it as realistic as we can do, ready for your mock towards the end of the summer term. So we've got question 1 here on page 26. Have a go at labelling up A and B, okay, and then we will go over the answers, and have a go at doing parts 2 and 3 at the bottom of the page and over the page on page 27. Once you've finished, pause the video and we will go over it, and you can self-assess it using the mark schemes that WJC provide. So there's parts 2 and 3, and there's part B, which is over the page. So, in terms of what they're looking for question 1A at the start of page 26, A is the vena cava and B is the atrium, and it's easy, it's 1 mark for each of those correct labels. Part 2, state the organ from where the blood has come in the arrow Z entering the heart. So you can see Z coming in on the left side of the heart. So it should have come from the lungs, or the lung is appropriate. Continue arrow Z to show the path of the blood passing through and then leaving the heart. So they want the arrow in through the atrium and out through the aorta. So if I go back to the diagram, they want the arrow going in and out like that, okay? As long as you've got that route, that will get you the mark. Part 3 then, it says name structure X and its function. If you've got valve, you get the mark. If you've said tricuspid, okay, that's absolutely fine, but you do need to put the word valve on the end, tricuspid valve, okay? Its function prevents backflow, prevents blood trying to go back into, okay, the atrium and travel back out the heart the wrong way. And finally, part B, about William Harvey. Harvey said that blood flows through blood vessels in a single circulatory system, but his idea contains one error. Rewrite it, correcting his error. The error is it's not a single circulatory system, it is double, because there are two halves to the heart, which is two separate pumps. One pump pumping oxygenated blood to the head and the body, the other half of the heart, the other pump pumping the returning blood back to the lungs to go and pick up oxygen. So give yourself a mark out of 6. I don't know why it says 7 on there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It is 7 marks, okay? So it is out of 7 marks, okay? So give yourself a mark out of 7. 5, 6. That's because they forgot to add up that mark there. There we are, out of 7. Okay. Turn over the page then to page 28. A very similar question, okay. They will give you different diagrams of the heart. So sometimes you get these nice ones like I've shown you in the previous question and this one, where the two blood vessels, the arteries at the top, are easily identifiable. Sometimes they will cross them over. So be warned, make sure you could identify both. So have a go at labelling A, B, C and D on the diagram for part A. For part B, as you go through the question, see if you can name this blood vessel going over the surface of the heart, and you can see what's happening in the blood vessel here. And then over the page to page 29, okay, there's a repeat of the question at the top of the page, name blood vessel E. Give one method of treating the narrowed part of blood vessel E and explain how the method of treatment works, okay? This is normally restricted to our triple pupils, but you may know a little bit about this. And then finally, this diagram of the blood supply, could you identify the names of the different blood vessels, okay? Or the types of blood vessels, in other words, arteries, veins and capillaries, okay? So, and how is the composition of the blood? Composition means what it's got in it. In other words, oxygen, okay? So pause the video, have a go at answering those questions on pages 28 and 29, and we will self-assess. So let's go back to the questions, and I'm going to go over these with you. So, A, first of all, is the aorta. B is the left ventricle, and you do need the left on there. C is the right atrium, and D is the vena cava. They don't require you to have superior or inferior, so there should be 4 marks for that section. Name the blood vessel E. E going across the surface of the heart. Back in the very first lessons, particularly the dissection lesson, it is the coronary artery going over the surface of the heart. So that question for some reason repeats itself over the top of the page 29. So we don't need to do that again. Give one method of treating the narrowed part of blood vessel E. Okay. So what you can take are drugs called statins, and statins will help to reduce the amount of cholesterol building up, okay? But you can also use something called a stent, okay? And a stent is where they put a tube into this blood vessel. They inflate, they put a balloon on the end. They inflate the balloon, and the balloon has got like a little wire mesh around the outside of it. So when they inflate the balloon, the wire mesh expands and opens up this blood vessel, and then they deflate the balloon and remove the stent, the tube that has helped to widen up that artery, okay, to keep the blood flowing. So that's how the method of treatment works. And I know my triple, you will have studied that because I've asked you to research that in the last week. Diagram 3 shows part of the blood supply in the lungs. Now we can see the blood supply is coming from here, F, and it's going away here. So if the blood is coming into the lungs, we can assume that the blood is deoxygenated that's coming into the lungs. So this blood vessel that's come away from the heart and to the lungs has to be, if it's away, It's an artery. It actually would be the pulmonary artery, but just artery is fine. This blood vessel, H, is going back to the heart to take the oxygenated blood to the heart so it can be pumped around. So it is a vein that brings the blood back to the heart, and it is the pulmonary vein that is bringing it back, but just vein would be fine. So what are the blood vessels that connect up the two? You should know these blood vessels because these are surrounding the tiny little alveoli that are in the lungs. So the blood vessels that go around each alveoli are the tiny little capillaries. 3 marks. So even though in the double you don't need to know the detailed descriptions of the structures of the arteries, capillaries and veins, we would expect you to know them in this question because this is relating it as well to the blood supply coming into the lungs and around the alveoli. Finally, give one way in which the composition of the blood in blood vessel F is different from the composition of blood in blood vessel H. So I've already described this. The blood in F would be deoxygenated, in other words, have very little oxygen, and the blood in H would be oxygenated and would have lots of oxygen, okay? So that's what they're looking for, and you'd have to have both to get your mark. So that question's out of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9, 10, 11, 12. So out of a total of 12 marks totally for those 2 pages worth of questions. So out of 12 marks, okay? And that is the end of today's lesson. Thank you, Year 10.